January evening, Mark Twain was sitting on one side of a blazing log fire, while his great friend Harriet Beecher Stowe sat on the other.
Hadleyburg. What do you know about it, Harriet?
Well, as far as I recall, it was an agreeable little town in Lorain County, Ohio. But didn't it change its name? I've been there once or twice, much like any other Midwestern parish.
Yes, but now it does have one distinguishing feature.
You mean its reputation for honesty?
Exactly. It's the most upright town in the whole region.
So they say, Mark, so they say.
And so it is now. And that's how it was way back in 1875, when it was still known as Hadleyburg.
But something happened in between?
It certainly did, and that's what I want to tell you about.
Go on.
Well, in 1875, every man, woman, and child in Lorain County would have sworn that the citizens of Hadleyburg were more upright, honest, and decent than any you could find in the whole United States of America. What's more, the inhabitants of Hadleyburg were fiercely proud of their reputation. After all, it stretched back 3 generations.
Too proud?
Maybe. Anyway, at some point, nobody knows quite how or indeed why, someone in Hadleyburg managed to offend a passing stranger. Well, not just offend, mortally offend.
Why? What did he do?
You know, Harriet, that never did exactly come to light, but it was so hurtful, such a deeply wounding incident, that the stranger determined to make the town pay.
What? Take his revenge on the whole town?
Exactly. Of course, like everyone else in the region, he knew of Hadleyburg's renowned reputation for honesty and straightforward dealing. So this was what he decided to attack. Hadleyburg thought itself incorruptible. Well, he was going to show them up for the hypocrites he believed them to be. He was going to corrupt them.
Goodness gracious. So how did he go about it?
Well, in those days, Hadleyburg wasn't a very large town. Taking the inhabitants as a whole, only 6 families stood out in terms of status and position. The heads of these households considered themselves the leading citizens of Hadleyburg.
So I suppose the stranger picked out one of these 6?
Not at all. To set his scheme working, he selected a poor elderly couple, the Richards, Edward and Mary Richards. Ed was a salesman on a pittance of a wage, and poor Mary scrimped and saved and stretched his meager salary to make ends meet. One evening, the old lady was sitting by the stove reading the Lorain County Herald when there was a knock on the door.
Now, who on earth can that be? And at this time of night, too. Yes?
Mrs. Richards?
Yes?
Pray forgive me for disturbing you, ma'am. May I have a word with your husband?
I'm afraid my husband is not at home. He has gone to Brixton and won't be back till tomorrow morning.
Oh, well, it's of no consequence, Mrs. Richards. All I want to do is ask your husband to deliver this great sackful here to its rightful owner. May I please bring it in? I could store it over there just by your stove.
Well, I don't know, really. I'm not at all sure.
I'd leave $5 to ensure its safe delivery.
Well, all right, come in. My goodness, it looks very heavy, that sack.
It is. There. Thank you. Let me explain, Mrs. Richards. I'm a stranger in these parts. I went out of my way this evening to come to Hadleyburg so that I can do something that's been on my mind for a long time.
Oh, yes?
And now my errand is complete. I'll be leaving America in a few days, and I can go with a clear conscience. Now, you see that envelope attached to the red wax seal at the neck of the sack?
Yes?
Inside that envelope is a paper that explains everything. Please ask your husband to read it. There's no need to break the wax seals. Now, here's the $5 bill. And I must be on my way. Please don't disturb yourself, ma'am. I'll see myself out. Good night.
I'll guarantee old Mary didn't wait till her husband got back next morning.
Of course not. The stranger hadn't been gone 5 minutes before curiosity got the better of her, and she opened the envelope.
What did she find?
A document which began, "This sack contains gold coin weighing 160 pounds, 4 ounces.
Mercy on us, and the door not locked.
Mary Richards flew up to it and secured it. Then she stood all in a tremble, wondering what else she should do. Thinking of nothing, she finally sat down again and picked up the paper.
I was not born in America, and soon I am returning to my native land. I am grateful to America for all the kindness shown to me during my long stay, but I am especially grateful to one certain person, a citizen of the town of Hadleyburg, who did an act of outstanding personal kindness to me some years ago. I arrived in this town one night, weary and starving hungry. I'd gambled away everything I owned and didn't have a single cent in my pocket. Wandering the darkened streets, I chanced to meet this man hurrying home. Thoroughly ashamed of myself, I begged him for help. He did not ignore me. He stood and listened, and then he gave me $20. $20! It was the same as giving me back my life, for that money put me back on my feet. Because of that gift, I became a rich man. Even more important than that, a remark that man made has remained with me to this day. Now, I have no idea who he was, but I want him found, and I want him to have the money in this sack. This is an honest town, an incorruptible town, and I know I can trust it. This man can be identified by the remark he made to me, full of good advice.
Old Mary Richards must have been in a fine old state reading this.
She certainly was, but that wasn't all. The document went on.
I suggest you publish this document in the local paper, and that a public meeting is called at the town hall under the chairmanship of the Reverend Nicholas Burgess. Let any person claiming to be the man who befriended me provide, in a sealed envelope, the helpful remark he made to me. Mr. Burgess may then break the seal at the neck of the sack. Inside, he will find an envelope containing the very words. The person who provides the correct remark should be handed all the contents of the sack with my sincere gratitude.
I suppose Mary Richards didn't sleep much that night.
Not a wink. And the moment her husband opened the front door next morning, she blurted out the whole story. I don't know what she expected his reaction to be, but it certainly astonished her.
You say that sack is filled with gold coins and weighs 160 pounds? Let me work it out. It's worth $40,000. Think of it, Mary. A whole fortune. Not one of the 6 top men in this town is worth more than that. We're rich, Mary. Rich. All we have to do is burn that paper, and we never need want for anything for the rest of our lives.
What utter nonsense, Edward. That would be thoroughly immoral and dishonest. Anyway, how would we explain a sudden access to wealth to our neighbors, to the rest of the town? Money doesn't grow on trees.
No, you're right, of course, Mary. Please excuse a sudden rush of blood to the head. What I'll do is take this letter to the editor of the Herald. It'll be the biggest story old Harry Cox has had for many a year. It'll set the town ablaze.
Which is precisely what he did. But when he got back home, he and Mary couldn't help speculating about who the sackful of gold was really intended for. The man who had once helped a stranger with money and good advice.
I reckon that stranger got here too late, Ed.
I know what you're thinking. The one man in Hadleyburg who would have handed over $20 to a beggar.
And offered a fund of helpful advice was
Barclay
Goodson.
Goodson. Pity he died 6 months ago.
Hadleyburg hasn't really been the same since. He was the living conscience of this town.
And thoroughly disliked because of it.
Shh! Don't say such things, Edward.
Well, it's true. And now Nicholas Burgess and his conscience have taken over. Now he's setting himself up to be the most hated man in Hadleyburg.
It's not only his conscience, Ed, as we all know. He's disliked for a very good reason. Isn't it odd that the stranger should have appointed the Reverend Burgess to hand over the money?
Maybe the stranger knows more than the town does.
What do you mean?
Listen, Mary, Nicholas Burgess isn't a bad man.
Nonsense.
He's not a bad man, I tell you. All the feeling that was whipped up against him, it was all on account of one thing.
As if that wasn't enough.
One thing, Mary, that he wasn't guilty of.
Excuse me, but everyone in this town knows that he was guilty of it.
Mary, I give you my word. He was innocent.
How do you know?
There's something I've been wanting to tell you for a long time. I was the only person in Hadleyburg who knew he was innocent. I could have saved him, but you know how wrought up the town was. I didn't have the courage to do it. It would have turned everyone against me. I felt mean, oh so mean, but I just didn't dare.
You could have cleared his name? Poor Ed. I don't blame you. Not one little bit. Public opinion. One has to be so careful. I would have lost us the goodwill of so many people. But does he know you could have saved him all that anguish?
He doesn't. He doesn't suspect a thing.
What a relief. But do you know, I should have guessed. He's always trying to be so friendly. I don't give him any encouragement, but people notice, you know, the Wilsons, the Wilcox, even the Harknesses. You'd be surprised how many times they say, your friend, the Reverend Burgess, in that spiteful way. I wish he wouldn't persist in liking us. I can't think why he keeps it up.
I can tell you. When the affair was hot and everybody was condemning him, a group of fellows planned to grab him and ride him out of town. But I was still feeling so guilty, my conscience hurt so much, that I went to him in secret and warned him. He packed up and left at once, and he stayed away until things had calmed down and tempers had cooled. He's protested his innocence all along, And at last, some people are beginning to believe him, so I'm pleased I did it.
So am I. Now. But only think what the town would have done to you if they'd found out at the time.
I know. It's lucky everyone thought it was Barclay Goodson and his conscience who tipped him off. Goodson denied it, of course, and they couldn't prove it was him. Now they'll never know the truth.
Edward, I'm so pleased you did it. You owed him that much, at least. But of course, Mr. Burgess wouldn't know anything about this gold business.
No, not yet.
Who does know? Except for you and me.
Well, only Harry Cox. I gave him that document.
Only us and the Coxes. Ed, perhaps it's not too late. Us and the Coxes, we could. Ed, will the Herald be printed by now?
I don't know. I could find out.
Then go, Edward. Go, just as fast as you can. Now!
I've got it in tomorrow's edition, my dear, and made as much of a mystery about it as I could. But of course, there's only one man in this town who could have handed out $20 to a total stranger.
And then pontificated about prudence or abstinence or hard work or some such. Barclay Goodson.
Goes without saying.
Which means that sackful of gold will go begging. Goodson's got no relatives that I know of.
What a waste.
Listen, Harry. At the moment, the only people who know about the gold and the secret remark are that Richards couple and us. Harry, can you stop the presses? Is it too late? We don't want the world knowing about this.
Quick, my hat. Won't be long. See you soon.
And now, Ed Richards and Harry Cox are hurrying through deserted streets from opposite directions. They meet, panting, at the foot of the printing house stairs.
Ed, it's you. Now listen, nobody knows about this but us, right?
Not a soul. On my honor. Except for Mary, of course, but she won't talk.
Oh, same goes for my Wilhelmina.
So I was just thinking, if it's not too late.
My thoughts precisely.
Hi, Mr. Cox. What you doing here?
Come to tell you there's no need to ship the early mail, Johnny, or any mail, till I tell you. Where have you been?
Just back from the railroad station, Mr. Cox. Sorry, but the mail's already gone.
Gone?
Yes, sirree. Just stabled the horses. They changed the timetable today for Brixton and all towns beyond. Had to get the papers in 20 minutes early. Real rush it was, but I did it. All those folks down the line, they'll have their morning Herald tomorrow just as usual. Yes, sirree.
Hadleyburg's telegraph office was open later than usual that night
Why was that, Mark?
because the printing works foreman at the Herald was the local representative of the Associated Press.
I don't understand.
It was a sideline. 3 or 4 times a year, the foreman managed to interest AP in a minor story. He'd be asked for 30 words and receive a few dollars for it. Well, not this time. His dispatch got an instant answer. Send the whole thing, all the details, 1,200 words. By breakfast time next morning, the name Hadleyburg was on every lip in America. Millions of people were discussing the stranger and his money sack, and marveling at the town's honesty and seeking to find the man it was intended for.
I suppose it's just possible that it wasn't Goodson whom the stranger met. It could conceivably be someone else.
I can't think who, Wilhelmina.
No. Well, we'll have to go through the charade, I suppose. The only thing I don't like about the whole arrangement is that it's to be in the charge of that Burgess man. Reverend, he calls himself.
Oh, Reverend he is. Now, let's forget all that nonsense.
You made enough of it in the paper at the time, Harry.
Yesterday's news. We've got today's and tomorrow's to think about now.
Of course, the whole town was agog, speculating about the few words that could unlock a $40,000 fortune.
What could that remark of old Goodson's have been?
If we could only guess.
But, of course, they couldn't. Meanwhile, the day set aside for the town meeting to be chaired by the Reverend Nicholas Burgess drew closer. With just a week to go, the Richards were sitting at home brooding when the postman delivered a letter. Mary opened it. But how could she possibly know
Oh, my goodness, Ed. Oh, my goodness.
that it came from the stranger who'd left the sack in their house so many weeks ago?
What is it, Mary?
Read this. Just read this.
Dear Mr. Richards, I've just learned of the extraordinary events taking place in Hadleyburg ever since a stranger left a sackful of gold in your house. Well, I happen to know who it was that passing stranger had begged for help. What's more, I know precisely what his generous benefactor said as he handed him the $20. The worthy citizen was none other than Barclay Goodson. God rest his soul. We were great friends, and on the day in question I happened to be passing through Hadleyburg. We'd spent the evening together while I awaited the midnight train. We'd eaten and drunk very well and were both in high spirits as we started back to his house. It was a very dark night, and I'd fallen a little behind him in the Hale Alley when the stranger accosted him. I saw the encounter, and I heard what passed between them. My friend was in an expansive and generous mood. I saw him hand over 2 $10 bills. Afterwards, as we walked to his house together, he told me how much he disliked most of the eminent men of the town. He made an exception in only 1 or 2 cases, and I think you were one of them. He told me that you, I think it was you, had once done him a very great service, possibly without realizing just how great it was, and that he wished he could have a fortune to leave when he died, for he would bequeath it to you. Now, if it was indeed you, you are his legitimate heir, and you are entitled to this sack of gold. So I'm going to reveal the remark he made to the stranger, well satisfied that, if by chance you are not the right man, you will seek and find him, and see that poor Goodson's debt of gratitude is paid. This is the remark. You are far from being a bad man. Go and reform. Yours truly, Howard L. Stevenson.
I can imagine Mary's reaction to that.
She was ecstatic. At one stroke, they'd been lifted from abject poverty. They'd be wealthy as the most prosperous family in Hadleyburg. Then a thought struck her.
Oh, Edward, how lucky that you did poor Goodson that great service, and how noble of you never to have mentioned it. But you should have told me. What was it?
And there, of course, poor Edward Richards was quite stumped. Not for the life of him could he recall any such incident.
I can't, Mary.
Why not?
Well, he made me promise. I swore on the holy book never to reveal it.
Oh, well, in that case, Edward, I won't press you, but it must have been a wonderful service you did him, and knowing you, I'm sure it was.
How did Edward sleep that night?
To be honest, he didn't. What kept him awake was his conscience and his memory. The outright lie he told his wife troubled him greatly, but worse was trying to remember what on earth he had done for Barclay Goodson. Round and round in his mind he went, trying to puzzle it out. At one moment, he remembered that Howard L. Stevenson had not been 100% sure that Edward Richards was indeed the same that Goodson had mentioned. A second later, he comforted himself with the thought that Edward Richards was the only name that Mr. Stevenson had, in fact, recalled.
So I suppose in the end he convinced himself that he was indeed entitled to the sack of gold?
Exactly. The only problem was that for the life of him, he couldn't remember what precisely he had done to earn Goodson's gratitude without, as the Stevenson letter went, knowing the full value of what he'd done. And then his mind went back nearly 50 years, and he remembered sweet and pretty Nancy Hewitt, the girl that young Barclay Goodson had fallen in love with and intended to marry. She'd been a newcomer to Hadleyburg, had arrived in response to an advertisement placed by Bill Benson in the Lorain County Times for an assistant in his drugstore. She'd told Goodson that she was an orphan brought up in a children's home without a relative in the world. And then Ed had discovered, purely by chance, that she indeed had a mother languishing at that very time in the county jail, charged with prostitution.
Oh, my goodness. Any woman who crossed the boundary of chastity back in the 1840s became known as a fallen woman, and a fallen woman bore a stigma that would never be wiped away. Upright citizens like those of Hadleyburg refused to associate with such women or their offspring. So what did the Ed Richards do?
He told Bill Benson, who instantly fired Nancy Hewitt. The story spread like wildfire, and the town made it perfectly clear to Barclay Goodson that any liaison between him and Nancy, who was certainly illegitimate since her mother wasn't married, was out of the question. This, decided Ed, must be the service he'd rendered Goodson, saving him from marrying a tainted girl. Goodson must have realized what a narrow escape he'd had, so he went to the grave eternally grateful to his benefactor.
Oh my goodness, Harry, oh my goodness.
What is it, Wilhelmina?
Read this, just read this.
Dear Mr. Clark, I've just learned of the extraordinary events taking place in Hadleyburg ever since a stranger left a sack full of gold in your town. Well, I happen to know who it was that passing stranger had begged for help. What's more, I know precisely what his generous benefactor said as he handed him the $20.
Yes, indeed, my dear Harriet. Virtually the self-same letter that the Richards had received.
You don't mean?
I do. That identical letter went to each of the 6 leading citizens of Hadleyburg and their wives. And all night long, 6 prominent members of the community tossed and turned, trying desperately to recall what special service they might have done for Barclay Goodson many years before.
And I suppose that while they were engaged in this, their wives were equally busy spending the $40,000.
Of course. An architect and builder from the next state had recently set up shop in Hadleyburg, but so far he'd had not a single client. All of a sudden, his fortunes took a turn for the better. First one lady, then another ventured into his premises to say, "Come round to my house on Monday week, but please, not a word to anyone. We're thinking of building." By the end of the day, he had 6 new clients.
Why Monday week?
Because the Sunday night had already been chosen for the public meeting at the town hall under the chairmanship of the Reverend Nicholas Burgess. Remember, the original letter had said that any claimant had to provide Burgess in a sealed envelope with a helpful remark made to the stranger. Burgess was then to break the seal at the neck of the sack, and inside he'd find an envelope containing the exact words. The person providing the correct remark must be handed all the contents of the sack.
Silence! Quiet, everyone! Do calm down, everybody. Now, I know most of Hadleyburg is gathered here in the town hall.
Plus half the county and a crowd of reporters.
Yes, so, Mr. Wilson, but a large crowd shouldn't mean chaos. I think we need to conduct this evening's affair in a spirit of decorum.
Just like in church, Reverend Burgess?
Precisely, Mr. Wilson, just like in church. Now, if I can have your attention, everybody, you all know something of the reasons I've been asked to chair this extraordinary meeting of the citizens of Hadleyburg. It's all in connection with that sack there, a sack filled to the top, we've been told, with gold coins. By now, everyone knows the strange story of how that sack arrived in Hadleyburg and why we need to assemble this evening. A stranger deposited it in one evening in the house of Mr. and Mrs. Richards here. He said he was acting on behalf of someone who was eternally grateful to one of the fellow citizens, a generously spirited man who had taken pity on him many years ago and handed him no less than $20 to relieve his distress. That sum set him up on his feet, and he went on to make his fortune. Now he wished to repay his benefactor. To prove his bona fides, any claimant was asked to provide the exact words he uttered as he handed the $20 to the stranger. Those exact words, sealed in an envelope, had to be passed to me in time for this evening's meeting, and I was to check their accuracy by unsealing the neck of this sack where I understand I will find the exact words used.
Well, get on with it.
All in good time, Mr. Wilson, but I have something more to say. I have to report that I have received not one, but a number of sealed envelopes. Oh. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it would seem that quite a few of our upright and honest fellow citizens claim to have handed that $20 to the stranger to remember what was said to him and thus to be eligible to receive this sack of gold. And here are the envelopes. I propose to open the first. Here we go. I will now read out loud what is here before me. The remark I made to the stranger in distress was this: "You are very far from being a bad man. Go and reform." This letter is signed. Will the person who sent me this letter please rise?
Oh, really?
Well, this is most puzzling. No less than 1, 2, 3, 6 of our fellow citizens have risen to their feet.
Ridiculous. I sent you that letter, Mr. Burgess.
Well, it's certainly your signature, Mr. Wilson.
But so did I.
I signed my letter.
I think I should perhaps open the other letters before breaking the seal on that sack. Now, this is signed by Mr. William Pinkerton, our esteemed bank manager. It reads, "The remark I made to the stranger in distress was this: you are very far from being a bad man. Go and reform." This one is from Mr. Harry Cox, the respected manager of our local newspaper. The remark I made to the stranger in distress was this: you are very far from being a bad man. Go and reform. This is from Inglesby Sargent. This from William Whitworth. This from John Wharton. Each identical. What are we to deduce from this, ladies and gentlemen?
I'll tell you what I deduce. Someone saw the contents of my letter before it reached you, Mr. Burgess. Someone saw it and copied it and sold it to anyone who would buy it. I accused those 5 men of corruption. I accused them of paying some thief for the contents of my letter. Those claims are fraudulent.
Monstrous.
Nothing of the sort.
Quite untrue, you rogue.
Disgraceful.
Have you read out all the letters, Mr. Burgess?
Get ready, Ed. Yours is next.
Oh, Mary, the shame. The humiliation, I'll never live it down.
Courage.
I find no more letters, Mr. Wilson, 6 in all.
Oh, bless God. We're saved. He's lost ours.
Of course, none of us yet knows if the comment you all claim to have made as you handed that stranger the $20 bill is the correct one. I think my next move must be to unseal this sack and see what we learn from what is within. That is what I propose to do right now. Mr. Richards, you are nearest that knife there on the table. Would you be so kind as to pass it to me?
Oh, certainly, Mr. Burgess. Here it is.
And this is where a word of explanation is called for.
It most certainly is, Mark. After all, the Richards did get that letter from Howard L. Stevenson with a remark in it. I presume Ed Richards put in his claim?
He certainly did. So why didn't Ed stand up with the other 5 and challenge Mr. Wilson? Is that what puzzles you, Harriet?
Not only that, why did Mr. Burgess say he received only 6 letters? I know there were 6 leading citizens in Hadleyburg, but if you count in the Richards, he ought to have received 7.
And of course, he did. Let me explain. In the first instance, the Richards, although well known in the town, were very poor. They knew their place. Ed Richards certainly wasn't going to stand up in public and challenge the most prominent men in the community. He stayed in his seat and kept his head well down. But in the second, Burgess owed Edward Richards a debt of gratitude, a debt he'd never really repaid. Ed had saved him from being hounded out of town back in the past, and he'd never forgotten it. Once he realized that 6 leading figures in the town were somehow involved in what looked like a fraud, he decided to say nothing about the letter he'd received from Ed Richards. This was his chance of exchanging one good deed for another.
I am now about to slice off the seal, holding the neck of this sack. There we go.
The document!
Read the document.
What does it say?
Yes, there is a paper here.
Well, read it out then.
Yeah, read it
Yes,
out.
read it,
Citizens
read
of
it, read it.
Hadleyburg, I regret to inform you that you have all been the subject of a hoax.
Oh, my God.
Quiet, let me proceed. There wasn't any pauper stranger, nor any $20 handout, nor any test remark. These are all inventions.
Oh, I can't believe that. What fraud.
Quiet, please, everybody, quiet. There's a good deal more. Just look how much there is. It goes on. These are the facts. Some years ago, I passed through your renowned Hadleyburg and received a deep offense for no reason whatsoever. I was shaken to my core by the insult, and I made up my mind to teach this town of yours with its reputation for virtue and honesty, a reputation of which you were inordinately proud, a lesson it would never forget. I would teach you that people of Hadleyburg were far from as pure as you thought you were. You, all of you, were just as corruptible as anyone else. The plan I devised could not work while Barclay Goodson was still alive. Everyone would assume that he was a benefit citizen who had handed out $20 to an indigent stranger. But as soon as I learned that Barclay Goodson had passed away, I knew my time had come. So I set up my trap and baited it. I may not catch all the men to whom I mail the pretended text secret, but I shall catch most of them. I hope the result of my little hoax will squelch your vanity and give Hadleyburg a new reputation, less to your liking. If I have succeeded, please open the sack and reveal its contents.
Well, open it. Open the sack. Come on,
Right,
come on,
here
get on
we
with
go. This isn't gold. Friends, these coins are lead, gilded lead. They're nearly worthless.
Mr. Chairman, may I suggest you auction off that sack of gilt lead pieces and donate the proceeds to someone among us who could benefit from them?
I propose the proceeds go to one man not tainted by the shameful episode, Mr. Edward Richards.
Yes, Ed Richards. He could certainly do with the money.
Richards.
Richards.
Yeah.
Richards.
Oh, Mary, how can we allow this? How can we? Hadn't I better stand up and admit? Oh, Mary, what shall I do?
Right. I open the bidding at $15. Who will give me $15 for all the contents of this sack? $15? You, sir? Thank you. 15, 20, 20, thank you. 25, 30?
40.
$40, very generous.
I bid $50.
Thank you. Keep it rolling, gentlemen. It's a worthy cause. Hadleyburg's reputation is at stake.
$100.
100 is bid. 120, thank you, sir. 150?
Edward, I'm all in a tremble. This can't be right.
It's not right, Mary. I'm just as guilty as the rest of them. I should be in the dock with the other 6. I was quite prepared to claim that sack when I thought it contained gold.
And I'm guilty along with you, Ed. We're both keeping quiet while Mr. Burgess is preparing to hand us a huge sum of money.
Money we don't deserve and have no right to.
Oh, but Ed, we're so poor. It'll make such a difference. Oh, my goodness. Did you hear the last bid?
$800. Make it 9, someone. Oh, thank you, sir. Very generous. Now, who will turn it into a round thousand? $1,000. Thank you. $1,000. Anyone else? No one? $1,000 it is then. $1,000 for this collection of gilded lead pieces. The proceeds to be handed to Mr. and Mrs. Richards, who I see sitting right there.
May I have the floor for a moment?
Certainly, sir. I don't think I know your name or...
I happen to be passing through Hadleyburg on the way to Cleveland. I was attracted by this gathering of townsfolk, and I've certainly had an entertaining evening. But I think I can bring something really positive to the proceedings.
Ed, that's the man. That's the stranger who left the sack at our house. That's him.
Are you sure?
Positive. Certain that's him.
Do come forward, sir. That's it right here. Now, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am a dealer in rare antiques. In the course of my business, I have dealings with people all over the world who specialize in numismatics, that is, in rare coins. I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that I have a way to make every one of these lead coins here, coins that we have just valued in total at $1,000, to be worth its weight in gold. In short, given your permission, I can restore the value of this sackful of coins to the $40,000 everyone thought it was worth.
Well, that sounds almost beyond belief. How would you do that, and what would become of the sum you raised?
Let me deal with your second question first. I will give part of the proceeds to your Mr. Richards. I would propose handing him $10,000, and I would do so tomorrow morning.
Yes.
This gets worse and worse.
And how will you achieve your miracle?
Rarities always depend on some device that arouses comment and curiosity. I was speaking to the manager of my hotel this morning, and I gathered that the events that have occurred here in Hadleyburg over the past few weeks have aroused interest all over the United States. Newspapers from New York to Los Angeles have been carrying the story. What I propose, ladies and gentlemen, is to emboss on the head and tail of each of these gilded lead coins the names of the 6 gentlemen who each claim to be the generous donor of $20 to a fictitious stranger. The 6 gentlemen who hope to acquire $40,000 from a falsehood. I seem to have general approval for my suggestion. I can assure you that the public would scramble to acquire the coins, and the value of the complete collection would then reach $40,000, if not more.
Oh, yes, that's great.
It was at this point, Harriet, that a certain Theodore Harkness saw a golden opportunity. Harkness was running for the state legislature. His main opponent happened to be William Pinkerton, Hadleyburg's bank manager, and one of the 6 claimants to the 40,000 pounds. Now, a new railroad line was being planned, and Harkness had his eye on a parcel of land which he knew would appeal to the developers. Harkness was a speculator at heart. The stakes were high, but the potential rewards were enormous. He made his way to the stranger.
Well, what's your price for the sack?
$40,000.
I'll give 20.
No.
25.
The price is $40,000, not a penny less. Take it or leave it.
All right, you win. I'll come to your hotel tomorrow morning at 10 with the cash. Now, I don't want this known. This is a private deal.
Agreed. I'll expect you at 10 o'clock precisely. Mr. Chairman, may I ask you to keep the sack for me until tomorrow? Now, which one is Mr. Richards? You, sir. I would like to hand you these 3 $500 notes. Please regard them as a down payment on the rest of the $10,000 that I've promised you. I propose to call on you before noon tomorrow with the money.
Early next morning, the stranger collected the sackful of lead coins and conveyed them to his hotel. At 10, Harkness appeared, and at the stranger's request wrote checks made out to bearer, totaling $40,000. At 11:30, the stranger was knocking on the Richards' front door. When Mary opened it, he simply handed her an envelope, raised his hat, turned, and walked away.
Oh, Mary, just look at that envelope. That's not cash. It's nowhere near bulky enough. That's a check. 2 at the most. I feel sick.
But what's the matter with a check, Edward?
Checks bounce. This'll be a dud. The bank has defrauded too often by dud checks. Let me see. Good grief.
What is it, Edward?
Fan me, Mary. Fan me. These checks are signed by Theodore Harkness. They're as good as gold.
But why would Doc Harkness sign checks for such a large amount?
I don't know, Mary. I don't know. There are 2 checks here made out to bearer. And they're not just for the remainder of the $10,000 that the stranger promised. These checks add up to $40,000.
Dear Lord, it can't be true.
Hold on, there's something else in this envelope. A note.
Mr. Richards, I'm a disappointed man. Your honesty is beyond the reach of temptation. I thought differently and I wronged you. I sincerely ask for your forgiveness. I thought that there were 7 men in Hadleyburg who would be debauched by the hope of easy money, but I was mistaken. You stand head and shoulders above the other 6. Take the whole pot. You deserve it.
Oh, if only those beautiful words were deserved, Mary. Once upon a time they would have been. Now I simply can't live with them. Here, take the note, Mary. Put it in the fire.
A few minutes later, a messenger arrived at the Richards house with another envelope. It was from Nicholas Burgess.
Ed, you saved me in a difficult time. I saved you last night. It was at the cost of a lie, but I made the sacrifice freely and out of a grateful heart. No one in this town knows better than I how good you are. I was in your debt. I hope I have discharged my obligation. Nicholas Burgess.
Well, Mark, I suppose you're going to tell me that the Richards lived happily ever after.
Oh, how I'd like to, Harriet. I'm afraid that's not the way things ended up. Firstly, Harkness had some of the fake gold coins stamped with a message mocking William Pinkerton and distributed them all around the town. As a result, he won the election with a landslide and then made his fortune out of a deal with the railroad. But the whole situation was more than poor Mary and Edward Richards could bear. There was no joy for them in their wealth. They grew paranoid. They began to believe that Nicholas Burgess must have told others about their secret. The constant congratulations of their friends and neighbors made them physically ill. The deception at the heart of their situation took its toll on both of them. They fell ill. Doctors could do nothing to relieve their distress. Eventually, lying side by side in bed, they died within minutes of each other. But shortly before he passed away, Edward confessed their guilt.
Poor people. The temptation was just too great.
You've a soft heart, Harriet.
But what happened when the Richards secret was finally revealed?
Well, Hadleyburg felt that its reputation for honesty and virtue had been irretrievably tarnished, as indeed it had. So they decided to rename their town and make a new start, and that's precisely what they did.
Well, it's certainly an honest town once more. I can vouch for that.
It's learned its lesson. You'd have to get up very early in the morning to catch it napping again.
You have been listening to Mark Twain's The Man Who Corrupted Hadleyburg, adapted for radio by Neville Teller, featuring our Playhouse on the Air performers,
Matthew Bejjani,
Jamie Bullins,
Joan Hudson,
Tory Petz,
Danny Johnson,
Paul Tisdale,
Amos Sobotka,
Anne Eklund,
Harry Heafer,
Jon Kruse,
Christine Cottam.